Joining me now, Dr. Dave Brat, Congressman, 7th District, Central Virginia. Dr. Brat, good to have you.
Hey, John, great to be on.
So, Dr. Brat, before we get into all this stuff, I love Fridays because it's date night with my wife, 5 o'clock, Vino's, 138 Battlefield Boulevard. We're going to be there. And when I was leaving, when I was going to bed last night, I told her you were on. And she's a very smart woman, Dave, as you know. And two things I want to tell you that she said last night. She said, tell Dr. Brat I'm voting for Donald Trump. Okay, so I said that. And tell him that his reelection is the most important election in Congress in the country. That's quite the compliment, Dave.
That's a compliment. Well, thank you very much for that one. I appreciate that.
All right, let's get to. We've got a lot to go over today, Doctor. I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with the new record number of people, Dr. Brat, on food stamps. Almost 50 million people on food stamps in America. What is going on out there?
Yeah, well, that's the fundamental transformation of America that's going on. And it starts in K-12 with a lack of ethics and values and the work ethic being taught. I bring this up. I brought this up. We had conversations with conservatives with the press up on Capitol Hill this week, and I brought this up. Americans, for too long, have been hard workers and done all the right things, but now we're not paying attention anymore. And so very well-intentioned, good folks are not paying attention to what's going on in the K-12 system, in the higher ed system, in Mizzou, et cetera. You got the far left hijacking universities and training people in that they're entitled to everything in the world these days. And so those are the folks that are going into our workforce. And if they're the least bit upset or whatever, they're not in the workforce. And so then our workforce numbers are terrible, right? The workforce participation rate is the lowest it's been since the 70s.
Right.
So you've got the fewest amount of people working in the economy. And then when that happens, of course, politicians get in the middle of things and try to offer up, right? Politicians like to give things to people in order to get votes. And so it's just a bad cycle that all starts with fundamental values. And that's where we're off track, and we're going to get into that conversation, I know, with respect to foreign policy, and it's all the same thing. We have a war of ideas going. This country was founded on classical liberal ideas, and now that word has been hijacked by a not liberal party. And so in Mizzou, you have a professor of journalism protected by the First Amendment that threatens with physical force, hey, I need some muscle over here to kick the press out of her own public event on a university setting. And so the left is no longer liberal, and we have not educated the average kid, and the American people are losing track of what the term liberal even means. Liberal is a protection of liberty. I mean, it's that obvious. The Conservative Party is the party now that protects liberty. And I'm sure we're going to get into that when we go to this war against ISIS. One party can't even acknowledge that there is a difference in ideas and acknowledge radical Islamic jihad coming for us, for our life, in their own words. And so that's a long answer to food stamps, but it's the fundamental answer is that we've lost our foundations in the Judeo-Christian tradition, in the constitutional tradition, the rights tradition, and the free market tradition. We're losing those things because we're not being intentional about them. And so a lot of folks are demanding entitlements. And the problem with that, of course, is that the rest of us have to pay the bill.
Well, let's see. You passed a budget in Congress a few weeks ago. You gave Barack Obama the ability basically to bust the budget caps. The first day, the debt went up by $339 billion. In 2 weeks, it went up by $520 billion. That's half $1 trillion added in 2 weeks. Now there's no checks and balances on Barack Obama. And the problem is, Congressman, a Republican majority-led House of Representatives and Senate gave Barack Obama the authority to do whatever he wants. And it's controlled by Republicans. Average people can't figure this whole thing out.
Well, they're figuring it out now. I mean, that was the Speaker Boehner challenge, right? I mean, the budget vote you just described in the Omnibus bill, 153 Republicans voted, but the rest of them went off with the Democrats. And that has been the strategy for the last few years in order to protect K Street and special interests, et cetera. That is now, I don't want to go so far as to say that has changed. It's in the process of changing, and everybody's got their eyes on the ball right now like crazy to see, are we really going to move to regular order now as been promised? The Freedom Caucus worked on that. If that sticks and holds, what you just described cannot happen to the budget again. And, of course, everybody listening out there knows I was a no vote on all of that budget nonsense, and I've been preaching on that for the past year. I came in on the Omnibus last year, and which was a disaster, and funded President Obama's unconstitutional amnesty. Mm-hmm. And now that's all of a piece with these new threats we have on the foreign policy side now. It's all linked. And so everybody's watching us very carefully. We just passed a bill out of the House yesterday with a veto-proof majority to help secure the refugee situation, with Comey's signature being the key element to that whole thing. But now you're going to see, and that was just a first step, right? Just the first small thing we can do to start getting our hands on this thing. Goodlatte's got a raft of legislation coming out of judiciary. That's good. Homeland Security, there's a ton more coming. Yeah, but the key to this whole thing is the Senate. If they can't pass a small bill to help secure the nation's security, and they vote not even to bring it up, which is likely, then the American people, they have to decide, and that's what I'm talking about. Have we educated the kids, the next generation, to vote for our own existence? Have they been taught that if there's a fundamental threat to our existence that's been announced by an enemy who now has taken ground and has attacked Paris and announced they're coming here? And if we have not taught the kids and the population, then we are in some serious trouble.
So let's play this out, Congressman Dave Brat, Republican, 7th District of Virginia. It's going to get to the U.S. Senate. Harry Reid, Minority Leader, has already said this bill is not going to see the light of day. So you have this 60-vote cloture rule, which is not in the Constitution. This is man-made, passed in the 1973. So basically, if he can rally 41 Democrats to table it, it doesn't even get debated in the U.S. Senate. We're paying $65,000 each to bring these Syrian refugees into the United States. The majority of the vetting process, 18 to 24 months, takes place after they're in the U.S. So if I've come into the U.S. illegitimately as a Syrian refugee, and I come in like Trump says, Trojan horse, and I come in and I'm illegitimate and I plan to blow people up, why am I going to stay in the refuge, wait for the FBI to out me? I'm going to disappear as soon as I get off the plane. How does this make any sense?
Well, it doesn't. And I heard yesterday on the House floor, the Democrats had a very, very hard vote yesterday. We got 50 Democrats or so, maybe just shy of that, for a veto-proof majority in the House. And now the same logic goes. So they got to get 40 Democrats to vote against what is a 2-to-1 issue for the American people as far as the last polling I've heard of. And so they're going to be under huge pressure, and no one wants to think in this way. But ISIS is announcing on a daily basis, and now there's news reports of Syrians at the Mexican border and Honduras issues, and one after the other now, and more attacks in Europe day by day. And all it takes, right, and we're just addressing the refugee problem. That's not the biggest problem, right? The temporary visa program is another major issue. The homegrown is probably the biggest issue, and that's just in the immigration migration space. The bigger issue, of course, is we have a president who doesn't have a strategy with respect to ISIS. He won't name the enemy. We're doing nothing. I think it's something like 7 sorties a day is what it breaks down to. And now France, thank goodness, is stepping up, and maybe we'll get to NATO and invoke Article 5, which is what we should do with our NATO allies, and then get the rest of the Sunnis on board with Jordan and Egypt and the Saudis to help bankroll and put their own folks up to go fight ISIS, who's clearly coming after them. And so those are the big picture pieces. Is we don't have still a strategy to fight an enemy, and we won't even name the enemy. So that's piece number one, and the American people are going to learn not to go for kind of the showboat presidential candidates anymore, right? Our nation is now under threat, and we have a president who's over his head, one-time senator with no experience in foreign policy, and we're seeing and the wrong philosophy, right? You can still have experts, but he's got the generals telling him what to do, and he won't do it.
Right.
And all of the intelligence reports have been telling him this has been coming for a couple of years now, and those were ignored, especially with respect to Syria. And so we've got a president over his head with the wrong philosophy. He's straight from the faculty lounge on the left side. That is utopian. And the irony of irony, he invokes Hebrew scripture all the time to mock Republicans, et cetera, on the war. He did it yesterday. And so it's very interesting that he will not call our enemy the bad guys, but then he critiques Americans and Republicans and folks who believe in just classical ideas like national self-defense, that he's attacking us instead of the enemy. And so that's the fundamental clash of ideas that I'm talking about. I'm with the vast majority of all thinkers on military policy, foreign policy, all the experts the West has ever known, versus a president who hopes that he can achieve utopia for the globe. I mean, it is delusional.
This president, no doubt, Congressman, there is a level of delusion there. And I think you hit the nail on the head. He can't even call the enemy by the right name. So forget the strategy when you can't even call it by the right name. But in his mind, the enemies are Republicans and conservatives who are trying to keep Americans out of harm's way. How are we the enemy? How does that make any sense? Now I want to get back to the United States Senate situation. Do you agree with me, Congressman, that if the Senate does not even take this issue up for debate, that is a dereliction of their duty? And why doesn't Mitch McConnell simply scrap the 60-vote cloture rule so that we can at least have this debate? How does this make any sense, Dave?
Well, I think he's going to have to. I mean, all the pressure in the world. And so this week we passed the first step bill because we had 3 days, right? I mean, the Paris tragedy was just last weekend.
Right, Friday.
And so we didn't go through regular order. In this case, that's okay. I'm the biggest believer in regular order, and that's what I've been fighting for the whole year. But when you have a national security threat, of course, you do the best you can to defend the homeland. So that's what we did to get started. But now going forward, it's going to take a few weeks to go through regular order, and we've been promised the Babin bill, by the way, and several other good bills that are much stronger than what we passed yesterday. Brian Babin out of Texas. Everyone can go look that up. But that's a very strong bill. And we've been promised regular order, debate, and to have votes on those tough bills that will have much more impact, but they'll take longer time to put through. And so the eyes of the world are now zooming. this is the only issue in the office, right? I mean, last week it was budget issues and transportation issues, and Obamacare and et cetera. Now this is the only issue. American eyes are trained on this. They're waiting to hear common sense out of their leaders and leadership. So Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan are going to be on TV, and they're going to be tested in full on this issue. And so I think they're going to have to do what you just said. I mean, this will make no sense if the Republicans own the Senate and the House and act like we don't own it. Then we're going to be held accountable instead of the other guys. And so prior to this speaker, 70% of Republicans are upset with their own leadership.
Right.
That's not a good number. And so here's the American people want some action, and if they don't get it, I think there's going to be a lot of senators getting kicked out of office.
I think there is also, because it's one thing to state your position, like we had Senator Tim Kaine on our show the other day. He is in favor of continuing the Syrian refugee program into the United States unabated. He staked it out. He gave his reasons. Okay, that's an honest debate. We need to have it. Now, I'm going to ask you a point-blank question. I've asked everyone that has come on. In the event that the American Safe Act, which is, not that strong of an act, but it's something, in the event that either gets vetoed by President Obama or doesn't even get to his desk, are you willing to cut the funding for the Syrian refugee program if there's no other option?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're looking out for national security. And so the press, always just constantly likes to put things in terms of Hollywood. Are you going to shut the government down? Are you going to do right? That's not the issue. The issue is you do what's best to protect the American homeland and the American people, period. Right? And then you play out the negotiations. We don't own the executive branch, and we don't own the 60-vote threshold in the Senate, but we do own the House. And so for goodness sake, et cetera, we better show the American people what we believe now, right? We own the House. We just had a bunch of drama over leadership. And so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you use whatever means the House has in order to keep the nation safe. And so, in the end, we may not get 100% of what we want, but you certainly start out with what you want.
Absolutely.
And then you negotiate with the Senate, which I hope wants what we want as their fellow Republican body. And then you got to negotiate with the president. And I'm more than happy to have this debate on TV with the president when you got a 2-to-1 issue with the American people.
Right.
And so, again, we'll see whether our side will stand up and fight the fight. And this one, right, I mean, you can have differences of opinion on some issues, but this one, I mean, the evidence is just start to come in, right? We've just seen the tip of the iceberg with respect to what we do know about ISIS. We're going to find out more and more of the story, and Americans are not going to be happy when they find out the full story.
I tell you what, we're going to have the debate. I think it's owed to the American people, and I look forward to it. And we want to thank Congressman Dr. Dave Brat for being with us, 7th District Republican, Central Virginia. That's the Richmond area. Dave, it's always an honor to have you on. Keep up the good work. More information, go to brat.house.gov, brat.house.gov. And remember, the Fräulein says Dr. Brat's reelection to Congress is the most important election in 2016 after the president. What do you think of that? We'll be back.
I think I like the Fräulein.
She's really smart.